Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to completely reframe the history of some of the world's most notorious syndicates. We're looking way past those gritty modern headlines to uncover the deeply mystical and honestly highly ritualistic origins that actually built these underground empires. It's a wild journey, so let's just jump right in. It's a massive contradiction, isn't it? Because, while modern law enforcement naturally focuses on the day-to-day reality of organized crime, stuff like extortion and trafficking, today we're diving straight into a story of burning temples, esoteric magic, and warrior monks. We're tracing the lineage of modern organized crime back to a deeply spiritual, incredibly violent genesis. So, to understand how we actually get from a monastery to a global syndicate, we first need to look at the Hungmen. This was a vast historical network of brotherhoods operating across China. But here's the thing, they weren't just a gang. The Hungmen were built on this incredibly deep esoteric foundation. They are the true ancestors of the modern Triad organizations we hear about today. All right, Section 1, Myth of Shaolin Exodus, where myth and history collide. According to the foundational mythologies of these brotherhoods, the whole thing begins with the destruction of a legendary sanctuary. The Southern Shaolin Temple in Fujian province was literally burned to the ground by Qing imperial forces. Now, why did this happen? Well, depending on the account you read, it was either driven by the treason of corrupt Manchu officials or simply because the resident warrior monks were seen as a massive political threat. The state looked at their martial prowess and independence and decided, yeah, this has to be eradicated. The massacre was absolutely devastating. Out of the hundreds of monks who lived at the temple and perished in those flames, only 5 survivors managed to escape. These 5 men became forever immortalized in syndicate myth as the 5 ancestors. And this escape, it's the exact pivotal moment where this underground society was truly born. But honestly, the most incredible part of this escape is what they took with them. These 5 ancestors didn't just grab martial arts and anti-Qing rebellion tactics. They brought profound esoteric lineages with them. We're talking Chan or Zen Buddhism, Taoist internal alchemy, and deeply rooted folk animism. They were literally weaponizing their spirituality just to survive. Which brings us to Section 2, the 4 sacred doors, looking at their tactical and spiritual architecture. So the crucial thing to grasp here is where these rebels actually met. In traditional Chinese geomancy, or feng shui, their meeting place, known as the Yi Ting, or Justice Hall, wasn't just some secret room or a hidden basement. It was a carefully constructed sacred microcosm. It was designed to mirror the entire cosmos, the underworld, and the legendary realms of Ming loyalists. You have to think of it less like a gang hideout and way more like stepping into a meticulously mapped magical universe. As we map out the 4 doors here, you can see how the physical space completely dictated both their spiritual and criminal functions. Each cardinal direction aligns elemental forces with really vital operations. For instance, the East Gate, tied to Spring and the Azure Dragon, represented birth and handled new initiates. But then look at the South Gate, Fire, Summer, the Vermilion Bird. This was the terrifying gate of execution and blood pacts. The West Gate handled territory and commerce, while the North Gate, tied to winter and water, was strictly reserved for secrecy, concealment, and underworld retribution. It's wild. The entire criminal enterprise was fully integrated right into the cosmological calendar. Moving on to Section 3, Rituals and Blood Oaths, binding the brotherhood together. Let's actually step through those cosmological thresholds for a second. How exactly do you bind illiterate coastal smugglers, laborers, and aristocratic rebels into a single unbreakable syndicate? Well, you do it through a mix of terror and deep religious awe. To even join, recruits had to undergo a deeply binding ritual where they physically passed under an archway of crossed swords. This was known as the Bridge of Swords, or sometimes the Bridge of Magpies. And this wasn't just some cool visual for intimidation. It symbolized the literal crossing from the mundane world into a sacred liminal space that sat entirely outside the jurisdiction of imperial law. Once you were inside this sacred space, usually right under the fiery auspice of that South Gate we just talked about, the oaths were sealed in blood. These ceremonies involved burning paper offerings and directly invoking fierce martial deities. Think about the psychology of that. You were just making a promise to a mob boss. You were making a blood pact with the gods themselves. Section 4, Numerology and Secret Ciphers. Protecting these esoteric rituals was absolutely crucial. Protecting these highly treasonous rituals required deep, deep secrecy, relying on numerology derived from the ancient I Chang and Taoist cosmology. The numbers they used weren't just picked out of a hat. The number 36, for example, was foundational. It represented the heavenly Starks, a concept pulled straight from the classic novel The Water Margin, and it actually dictated the internal ranks and hierarchy of the entire lodge. Now, paired directly with this was the number 49. This represented the earthly fiends. By combining these esoteric concepts, syndicate leaders were given specific numeric titles instead of using their actual names, which is just a fascinating quirk of the system. So, for example, the incense master was known as the 489, and the vanguard was known as the 424. And then, of course, there is the number 3, which held immense overarching power. It symbolized the grand unity of heaven, earth, and man. On top of that, it served as this constant numerical reminder of the ongoing alliance between the surviving Shaolin monks and their earthly patrons. But it goes beyond just numbers. These early offshoots communicated via a really complex system known as the secret language, or literally translated, under the sea. This whole system involved visual ciphers, hidden hand signs, and poetry. But what's truly fascinating here is that these weren't merely security measures to trick Qing dynasty spies. They were treated as active magical protective formulas. To put that into perspective, even something as simple as dinner could be magical. The arrangement of teacups, the folding of paper money, or the exact placement of chopsticks on a banquet table acted as a physical talisman. Seriously, a properly set table could literally summon guardian spirits like Guan Yu, the legendary god of war and brotherhood, to watch over their meetings. Talk about a high-stakes dinner party, right? So, how does all this ancient magic actually survive into the 21st century? That brings us to Section 5, Echoes in Modern Syndicates. Over the centuries, as you'd expect, the original Hongmen fragmented. They spread through the diaspora, moving from Fujian and Guangdong over to Macau, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, and eventually into Western Chinatowns. As they moved, the framework of those four doors had to adapt to local criminal economies. Yet, to this day, the internal architecture of massive, modern traditional factions, groups like the Sun Yi On, the Woxing Wao, and the 14K, still preserve fragments of these exact 17th century martial monastic rituals. And this presents a truly surreal contrast when we look at the reality of these organizations today. On one hand, you have the lodge master, the Hingchu, or incense master, acting as this deeply revered custodian of esoteric Taoist traditions. And on the other hand, well, this exact same organization is overseeing brutal, modern transnational crimes. We're talking narcotics, extortion, human trafficking. It's an incredible duality. Ultimately, no matter how much the crimes themselves have modernized, this bizarre fusion of militant anti-authoritarianism and folk magic remains the unshakable bedrock of the underground brotherhood to this very day. The legacy of that burning temple? It's still very much alive, just hidden in the shadows. Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. We've seen how deeply woven this mysticism is into the fabric of these syndicates, but if modern law enforcement only looks at them through the lens of transnational crime, if they're only seeing the extortion and the trafficking, what happens to the ancient magic? Does it slowly fade away, or does it simply hide deeper behind the four doors?